When the headlines screamed, Malcolm-Jamal Warner dead at 54, hearts across the globe fractured. The initial details were sparse, almost cruel in their simplicity. Malcolm had been on a family vacation in Costa Rica with his wife and his 8-year-old daughter, a rare escape from the public eye he so fiercely guarded. While swimming in the crystal waters off the Pacific coast, something went wrong. Strong currents pulled him under. Surfers nearby rushed to help, but by the time they reached him, it was too late. His body was recovered about 20 minutes later. Lifeless, but intact. CPR was performed, but the ocean had already claimed him. Friends, colleagues, and fans took to social media within hours. The world mourned the man they had watched grow from Theo Huxtable into a poetic, dignified, and deeply respected artist. While the world lit candles, replayed old episodes of The Cosby Show, and struggled to accept the sudden death of the beloved actor, his own mother remained completely silent. Until now. In a revelation that left even his closest friends in tears, Pamela Warner has finally broken her silence, and what she revealed has shocked everyone. Not just how he died. Not just what really happened that morning in Costa Rica, but what he told her just hours before his death. His final words. His private fears. His last promise. And most heartbreaking of all, the thing he begged her not to tell the world unless he never came back. This isn't a typical celebrity tribute. This is a mother's raw truth. A story filled with secrets that were never supposed to be told. Why did Malcolm-Jamal Warner keep his marriage and daughter hidden from the spotlight for years? Why did his mother say, "I knew he was going to die that day," before the accident even happened? And what chilling detail about the ocean itself did she share that left everyone in the room frozen in silence? If you think you know the full story of Malcolm-Jamal Warner's final days, think again. Because his mother's confession changes everything. Watch until the very end, because what she says in her last words will stay with you forever. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was born on August 18, 1970, in Jersey City, New Jersey. His mother, Pamela Warner, raised him as a single parent after separating from his father. She chose the name Malcolm-Jamal to reflect a sense of cultural pride and strength, drawing inspiration from figures like Malcolm X and jazz pianist Ahmad Jamal. When Malcolm was still a child, Pamela moved with him to Los Angeles, where she supported his growing interest in the arts. Despite working multiple jobs, she made time to enroll him in acting classes and community workshops. By the age of 9, Malcolm had begun acting, and Pamela, deeply committed to his future, became his manager. In 1984, at just 13 years old, Malcolm auditioned for a new television project by Bill Cosby. The role was for Theo Huxtable, the teenage son in The Cosby Show. Malcolm was the final audition of the day, and despite being a last-minute addition, he impressed the producers and was cast in the role. That moment marked the beginning of his rise to national fame and a long career in television and the arts. He had no agent, no formal training, but he had presence. He didn't try to be funny. He just was. He didn't try to act. He became Theo. They called Pamela the next day. He got the part. She screamed so loudly the neighbors thought someone had died. In a way, someone did, she said years later. My little boy. That day, the world got to share him. And I started preparing to let him go. The Cosby Show exploded. Malcolm became a national icon almost overnight. Viewers adored his teenage charm, his natural comedic timing, his heartfelt moments. But behind the scenes, Pamela worked hard to keep his feet on the ground. She insisted on him continuing his education. She accompanied him to every taping. She turned down interviews and brand deals that she felt weren't right. She wasn't just his mother, she was his manager, his guardian, his lighthouse. But fame came with its shadows. Pamela noticed how quickly people changed around him. Kids who once ignored him at school now wanted to be his friend. Adults spoke to her differently. The pressure was mounting. But Malcolm never stopped being her son. He came home, took out the trash, kissed her on the cheek, and asked if she wanted tea. He was Theo to the world, she said. But to me, he was just Malcolm. My baby. Success didn't shield them from reality. Pamela began to fear the impact of sudden stardom on her son's soul. He was still growing. Still learning who he was. And now, millions of people thought they knew him. People would say, "Oh, he must be so lucky," Pamela recalled. And he was. But luck doesn't mean freedom. He was under a microscope. She watched him battle expectations. Directors wanted him to be funny, charming, perfect. Fans expected him to always be Theo. Reporters dug into his life, his relationships, his body, his future. Pamela saw the cracks forming. He would come home from tapings and sit in silence for hours. He began writing poetry, listening to jazz, asking big questions about identity, masculinity, race, and truth. I remember once he looked at me and said, "Mom, sometimes I feel like everyone sees me but no one knows me." That scared me. Pamela did her best to protect him. She got him therapy. She pulled him from certain projects. She encouraged his creative independence. But she could see that fame had taken something from him, even as it gave him everything. Still, Malcolm never lost his center. He remained humble, grounded, kind. He spoke with intention. He treated the crew with respect. He called his mother every day, even when filming out of state. "If I ever die without saying I love you," he once told her, "just know I said it every day." She did know. She always knew. The end of The Cosby Show in 1992 was a turning point in Malcolm's life. While the world saw the end of a beloved television series, Pamela saw her son standing at the edge of adulthood with the weight of the world pressing against his back. She watched him carefully as the camera stopped rolling, knowing that many child stars lost themselves once the spotlight faded. But Malcolm was never going to be like the rest. He was born with an old soul, and he was determined to take back control of his narrative. Pamela remembered the conversations they had in the quiet spaces between work and life. Malcolm didn't want to be typecast. He didn't want to live forever as Theo, even though he was grateful for the role that made him a household name. "I want to show them who I really am," he once told her, his eyes bright with intention. "I want to create, not just perform." And so he did. He dived deep into poetry, often performing under the radar at spoken word nights around Los Angeles. He wrote verses that were raw, rhythmic, and deeply personal, exploring identity, love, heartbreak, and the legacy of black men in America. Pamela would sit in the back of the crowd, unnoticed, listening with tears in her eyes as her son bared his soul with nothing but a microphone and truth. He also pursued music, learning bass guitar and forming his own band. Malcolm's music was not made for the charts, it was made for the heart. A fusion of jazz, soul, and funk, his albums didn't sell millions, but they were crafted with passion and depth. Pamela proudly played them at family gatherings and even kept a framed vinyl of his first record on her mantle. He had nothing to prove, she often said. Only something to share. Malcolm also ventured behind the camera, directing episodes of television and creating thoughtful projects that gave platforms to voices often overlooked. He was respected, not just as an actor, but as a thinker, a creator, a builder. Through it all, Pamela watched the boy she raised evolve into a man who knew who he was. Not perfect, not invincible, but authentic. He was never chasing fame, she said. He was chasing meaning. There was one thing Malcolm kept fiercely guarded: his private life. While the world speculated, Pamela remained one of the few people who truly knew the whole story. Malcolm had quietly married a woman he adored, a woman he deliberately kept away from the flashing cameras. The identity of his wife was not public knowledge, and it stayed that way, because that's what Malcolm wanted. He didn't want his love story to be for public consumption, Pamela said. He wanted to protect her. And protect their daughter. Their daughter, now 8, had become the center of his universe. Pamela spoke about the day he called her years ago and told her he was going to be a father. She remembered the nervous tremor in his voice, the same kind he had when he first told her he got the part on The Cosby Show. But underneath that tremor was a pride so radiant it nearly sang through the phone. "You're going to be a grandma," he said, laughing softly. Pamela wept that night. Not because she was scared, but because she knew that her son, this boy she raised with aching hands and sleepless nights, was about to step into a role even greater than any he had ever played: fatherhood. She saw the way he transformed. The way he held his daughter, the way he read her bedtime stories with the same warmth she once gave him. He cooked for her. He played her songs on his bass. He taught her how to express herself with art. Malcolm didn't just raise his daughter, he cherished her. Pamela adored watching him with her granddaughter. He was so gentle with her, she recalled. He told me he wanted her to grow up knowing she was enough. Just as she was. The little girl had inherited her father's curious eyes and thoughtful silence. And she loved her grandmother, calling Pamela Nana Pam, with a giggle that melted hearts. The family, while out of the spotlight, was close. They celebrated holidays together. Pamela would sometimes stay over for days, helping with school projects, baking cookies, and reminiscing. Those memories, those simple, beautiful moments, are what now haunt her the most. It was July 18, 2025, 2 days before the tragedy, when Pamela received what would be the last phone call from her son. He was calling from Costa Rica, his voice full of joy. "Mom, this place is magical," he said. She could hear the ocean in the background, the wind brushing softly through the phone. His daughter was laughing in the distance. His wife was nearby, calling him to join them for dinner. It was the kind of conversation you have when life feels full and perfect, when nothing seems capable of going wrong. He told her about the beach, about the monkeys in the trees, about the mangoes so ripe they practically fell into your hands. He said he felt rested, at peace. "It's like I've been waiting my whole life to breathe this kind of air," he told her. They talked for nearly 20 minutes. He asked how she was feeling. He reminded her to take her medication. He promised to send photos soon. At the end of the call, Pamela told him she loved him. He said it back 3 times. "I love you, Ma. Always." That was the last time she heard his voice. "He sounded so happy," Pamela said. "So present." It didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a beginning. In the days that followed, she would replay that conversation in her mind 1,000 times. Every word, every pause, every laugh. And the silence after it ended. July 20th, 2025 began like any other sunny morning on the coast of Costa Rica. The Warner family had spent several days in a private villa near Playa Hermosa, a stretch of sand known for its quiet beauty and mild waves. That morning, Malcolm decided to take his daughter for a swim before breakfast. The sun had just crept over the horizon, casting golden light across the waves. It was supposed to be another peaceful moment, just father and daughter, floating in the sea. But the ocean can be deceiving. What looked calm on the surface concealed a rip current beneath. They waded in. Pamela would later learn that Malcolm held his daughter's hand the whole time. But within minutes, the pull of the tide grew stronger. He was caught in it. She screamed. He pushed her forward, shouting for her to swim to shore, and she did, frantic and terrified, while the current pulled him deeper. Nearby surfers noticed what was happening. They paddled furiously toward him. By the time they reached Malcolm, he was unconscious, floating face down. They brought him to shore. CPR was performed by locals and tourists. Emergency responders arrived, but it was too late. He had been under too long. Pamela got the call that afternoon. She was in her kitchen, peeling apples for a pie her granddaughter liked. Her hands were sticky with sugar and cinnamon. The phone rang. It was her daughter-in-law. The voice on the other end was screaming, gasping, sobbing, words stumbling over each other like falling rocks. "He's gone, Mom. He's gone." Pamela dropped the knife. The apples spilled onto the floor. The world blurred. Pamela couldn't speak. Not to anyone. Not even to herself. For the first few days after Malcolm's death, she moved like a ghost. Friends came over. Family members wept beside her. Journalists camped outside her home, waiting for a statement. But she gave none. Not because she was hiding, but because she couldn't find her voice. She sat in Malcolm's old room, now turned into a guest room, and stared at the ceiling. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. Every moment was a memory, the scraped knees she had kissed. The report cards he had proudly shown her. The graduation suit she had pressed. The Grammy speech he almost gave but never wrote. It all played like a broken film reel in her mind. The sound of her phone ringing was unbearable. Each vibration reminded her that the world expected something from her. But she had nothing left to give. "I wasn't ready to talk about him like he was gone," she said. "I needed to believe he was just away somewhere. That he'd call. That he'd walk through the door." She watched old episodes of The Cosby Show on mute. Not to hear his voice, but just to see his face moving, alive, smiling. She would place her hand on the screen and whisper, "Come back." 11 days passed before she opened her mouth to speak a word about her son publicly. 11 days of haunting silence. 11 days of grief she would carry for the rest of her life. Malcolm's funeral was held in a private ceremony attended only by family and a handful of close friends. It was not a celebrity event. There were no flashing cameras, no press releases. Just a small chapel, filled with roses and tears. Pamela walked into the room on her son's arm. The arm of a man she had raised, who was now gone. He was laid in a dark wood casket lined with silk, dressed in one of his favorite suits. A photo of him holding his daughter stood beside the altar. When it came time to speak, Pamela stood at the pulpit, her hands trembling. "My son was not a perfect man," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But he was a perfectly loving one." She talked about his poetry. About how he once stayed up all night helping his daughter build a science project. About how he sent her flowers on her birthday every year without fail. She spoke of the quiet moments, the things no one ever saw. Then she looked at the crowd and said, "I carried him once inside me. Now I carry him inside my heart. Forever." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Outside, Fans gathered to pay their respects, holding signs and candles.
Some sang. Some wept.
Some simply stood in silence.
The pain was global.
But no one felt it more deeply than the woman who brought him into the world, and had to be the one to say goodbye. The morning of July 31, 2025, was unusually quiet. After nearly 2 weeks of silence following Malcolm-Jamal Warner's tragic passing, the world had grown used to the absence of his mother's voice. Fans speculated. Journalists waited. But Pamela Warner had refused to speak, until that morning.
She didn't choose a press conference.
She didn't arrange for cameras or microphones. Instead, she invited one trusted local journalist, someone who had known Malcolm as a child, to sit with her in her living room. The interview would be transcribed and released online, with Pamela's full permission.
But no live feeds.
No rehearsals. Just one grieving mother, a recorder on the coffee table, and her truth. She wore Malcolm's old hoodie that day. The one he left at her house during a visit 3 years earlier. "It still smells like him," she said softly as the recorder clicked on. Her voice trembled as she began. "I wasn't ready to talk. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much. Where do you begin when your whole world has gone quiet?"
She took a deep breath.
Her hands clutched a tissue, but her eyes stayed steady. "My son Malcolm-Jamal was not just a famous face.
He was my baby. My only child.
I carried him for 9 months. I raised him by myself. I saw him through scraped knees, stage lights, heartbreaks, and triumphs. And now I have to speak of him in the past tense, and it's the cruelest thing I've ever had to do." Her voice cracked, but she continued. She spoke of the boy who asked deep questions before he could spell his own name.
The boy who sang to his toys.
The teenager who bought her flowers from his first paycheck. The man who held his daughter like the most delicate thing in the world. "I know the world loved him as Theo," she said, managing a tearful smile. "And I'm so grateful for that. But to me, he was always just Malcolm. The boy who asked me to check under his bed for monsters even when he was 11. The young man who called me Ma in the middle of big Hollywood parties, because he never forgot who raised him."
She paused.
Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I know he died a hero. I know he died saving his daughter. And I know he would have done it again, because that's who he was. But I would trade anything, to have drowned in his place." Those words sent shockwaves through the hearts of readers around the world. Pamela went on to thank his fans for their kindness. She read aloud letters she had received. Messages from people in Japan, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, all sharing how Malcolm's roles, his poetry, and his music had touched their lives. "I never imagined," she whispered, "that the child I raised with food stamps and bedtime prayers would one day belong to the whole world."
But he did. He does.
The statement ended not with fanfare, but with a soft whisper that would be repeated across headlines, shared across social media, and printed on candlelight vigil signs.
"He was the world's light.
But he was my son." After the interview was published, Pamela closed her door and didn't come out for 3 more days. Grief is a tide, and hers had begun to pull her under once more. The statement she gave had taken everything she had left. It wasn't just a message to the world, it was the most painful chapter of her life laid bare for strangers to read. And yet, she said, it was necessary. Because if she didn't speak his name, she feared the silence would swallow him. And she wasn't ready for him to disappear from the world's memory. Day by day, she began to rebuild something resembling a routine. She would make tea every morning and sit on the porch. She would listen to Malcolm's music on low volume, not because she wanted to cry, but because she wanted to hear his soul. Sometimes she spoke to him, out loud, hoping the wind would carry her words to wherever he now was. But grief isn't something you move on from. It's something you move with. Pamela began spending more time with her granddaughter, who had returned home with her mother shortly after the funeral. The little girl didn't fully understand the weight of what had happened, but she understood enough. She knew her daddy was gone. She knew Nana Pam was hurting. And she knew, in the way children always do, how to love without needing to fix anything. They would sit together in the living room, drawing pictures, watching old movies, or simply holding hands. One afternoon, the little girl brought her a piece of paper with a crayon drawing on it. It showed 3 stick figures, a man, a little girl, and an older woman. Above them, in the blue sky, was a sun with a smiling face. "That's Daddy," she said, pointing at the sun. Pamela broke down sobbing, but she hugged her tightly. In that moment, she understood that part of Malcolm still lived, not just in her heart, but in his child. In her laughter. In the way she tilted her head. In the quiet way she sat when she was deep in thought, just like her father used to do. Mother's Day passed soon after, and it was the first one without Malcolm. Pamela didn't answer her phone that day. She didn't respond to messages. She spent the morning reading an old letter Malcolm had written to her on his 25th birthday.
In it, he had written,
"Everything I've become, I owe to the woman who taught me that survival is not enough. We must live with purpose." That line stayed with her. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave it direction. In the weeks that followed, an outpouring of love flooded Pamela's home. Letters arrived from across the country and beyond. Some were written in perfect calligraphy. Others were scribbled in shaky handwriting by fans who had grown up watching The Cosby Show. Children sent drawings. Strangers sent poems. One man sent a painting of Malcolm standing in a field of stars. Pamela read every single letter. Some made her cry. Others made her laugh. Many made her feel something she hadn't felt since her son's death: warmth. One letter came from a woman in Atlanta who had been in an abusive household as a child. She wrote, "When the world was hard, Theo Huxtable was my friend. I'd sit in front of the TV and pretend he was my brother. Watching him made me believe I could survive too. Thank you for raising a boy who saved more people than he'll ever know." Another came from a teacher in Boston who used Malcolm's poetry in her classroom to help students understand identity and Black expression. "Your son taught my kids more than any textbook ever could," she wrote. "He gave them permission to be themselves." Pamela kept these letters in a box by her bedside. She would often take them out late at night, when the weight of silence became too much. They reminded her that she wasn't grieving alone. That Malcolm's life had been far bigger than either of them could have imagined. But one sentence stood out among all the words she received. It came from a little girl in Detroit who signed her name in pink marker. She wrote simply, "He was like sunshine. He made people happy." Pamela stared at that sentence for a long time. It was so simple, so honest, and so true. When asked later in another interview how she wanted Malcolm to be remembered, Pamela didn't hesitate. "He belonged to the world," she said. "But he was mine first." That line echoed across the internet like a hymn. It was printed on tribute shirts, painted on murals, quoted by fans in tears. Because it captured something universal: the private pain behind a public loss. The mother behind the man. The woman who gave the world a son, and had to bury him long before she should have. Pamela began to reflect more deeply on the boy she had raised and the man the world had come to know. To most, he was an actor, a poet, a musician, and a cultural icon. But to her, he was always Malcolm, the boy who picked dandelions for her on walks, who cried when he saw animals in pain, who kissed her hand when he thought she was sad. "I look back now and realize he was changing the world, even when he was little," she said. "He changed it with his smile, with the kindness he extended to strangers, with the vulnerability he showed through his art." Pamela believes his death was more than a tragedy. It was a reminder. A reminder to hold our loved ones close, to tell them we love them now, not later. To be present. To be kind. To live fully, as Malcolm did. As Pamela closes this chapter of mourning, she holds on to one truth: Malcolm lived a life worth remembering. Not because he was on television. Not because he was famous. But because he loved deeply, gave generously, and never forgot who he was. In her final public words, she said, "Don't remember my son for how he died. Remember him for how he made you feel alive. He made me proud every single day. And I will carry him with me, every breath, every step, until I see him again." And with that, the world felt her love, a mother's love so deep, so raw, so real, that even death could not quiet it. If Malcolm-Jamal Warner ever made you smile, cry, or reflect, even once, please like this video to honor his memory. Subscribe to this channel for more heartfelt videos and tributes to legends who've shaped our lives. Thank you for watching. And to Pamela Warner, your strength and love have touched the world more than words can say.